Caledonian Elixir. From Glasgow, Scotland, welcome to the Caledonian Elixir. I'm your host, Vincent, and we are on YouTube, Twitter, X, Rumble, and Facebook. Also as a podcast on Spotify. And you can get involved by leaving live chats. And if the contact number is on the screen, you can call in free from the UK. And the international number would normally be there, but it's not today. You can also support us by putting a like, subscribing, and follow. So it helps the show. So please do. So I hope you're all well. It's that time of year. You know, the leaves have fallen, the air's fresh. And I have to say, autumn is definitely my favourite season. So welcome back. And if you're finding us for the first time, we are a podcast and we do call-in shows that cover everything from politics to the paranormal, told with wit and true grit with guests and callers. Now, today we have a special guest joining us who is here to help us make sense of the almost surreal changes that is happening in the world today. You know, I can feel it, and I'm sure you can too. It's almost like a re-engineering of civilization, of our laws, our values, our economy, our technology. Yet there's a mystique, a disagreement who's causing these changes, from central bankers, corporate oligarchs, and corrupt politicians, or maybe they're all in it together. Well, to discuss this and more is my guest, Alan Paul Roberts. He's the author of the Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. And this is an important discussion, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So, without further ado, Paul Alan Roberts.
Really looking forward to this. Listened to a couple of your podcasts recently to get familiar with you and some of your guests in the past. And so, yeah, really looking forward to being with you today.
And I've been looking forward to talking to you too. And if you've been watching our shows as of recent, we have in the past did call-ins on this very subject of globalization, international affairs, and you know the alleged globalist plan to collapse our civilization. So it's something I can tell that there's a lot of people over here very interested in, and the mainstream media outlets here definitely aren't presenting us with accurate information. So it's more important than ever to get other voices such as yourselves on air and speaking the truth as you can see it. You know. So could you just describe for the audience your background and what prompted you to write your new book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything?
Sure. So I run a small business. I came up through the corporate world. I spent a couple decades in manufacturing, IT, and then international marketing. So I've been responsible for an IT team that created what we call an ERP system, enterprise resource planning system, basically runs a whole company. That was my early years in IT, and then I went on to become head of manufacturing for that company, and then went on into the marketing world after that, and that was international marketing with a company, a manufacturing company, a different one, and got to see a lot of the world, Japan, China, Australia, all over Europe.
Mm.
And so I got a good sense of a lot of different cultures in the world during that time. And in 2011, I launched my own business, my own small marketing firm to help small businesses compete with larger businesses. And been doing that ever since. I had no plans to write a book, so this book is my first book. I'm a first-time author. In other words, it came out in October of 2024. Um, as most people who run a small business know, you don't have enough time to get everything done. You're wearing a lot of hats. I had no plans to write a book. This was not in the works for me. So, but what happened to me in late April 2024, the last Saturday of April in 2024, I woke up one morning around 4 a.m. And as I was laying there getting ready to get out of bed to, use the bathroom, I had an experience unlike anything I've ever had. And what happened to me was I had this, I call it an instant knowledge, an intense instant knowledge of initially 6 pillars of both American and Western society in general that were under attack and in danger of falling. This knowledge was clearer than any knowledge I've ever had in my life, and it was simultaneously of all 6 pillars of society under attack and in danger of falling. Wasn't fearful thing, it was just very matter of fact. It was like a knowledge transfer is the best way I can describe this.
Hmm.
Got up, I wrote these down. I keep paper and pen in the bathroom. I wrote them down. I figured I'm gonna try to get back to bed. I'll forget them if I don't write them down. I wrote them down, laid back down. Within 2 or 3 minutes, another 3 set of pillars, 3 different ones, uh, in an instant flash. And the impression lasted from half a minute to maybe 2 minutes. It was just like you turn the lights on and you can feel the energy from the light. It was like that, except it was just knowledge. And then it just stopped. Got up, wrote them down. Now I have 9. Went back to bed one more time, really distracted by this point, like what is happening to me? And I had 2 more for a total of 11. Wrote those
Hmm.
down, and then at that point, I felt like God's trying to tell me something because this came from outside of me. This was not my own knowledge. I was familiar with some of the information, but this was an intensity and a clarity that was just shocking.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I said, God, why are you showing me this? I don't understand. And I just kept asking, why? And then finally I said, are you showing me this because you want me to write a book about it? I mean, what is this? And I said, if you want me to write a book, what's the title? And is it the same way, just a flash of knowledge? I just instantly knew the title, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. And I can tell you that I was surprised at that title. I was kind of stunned. Like my reaction was, that's a bold title. Like that is such a truth bomb of a title
Yeah.
that a lot of people won't touch the book just because the title will chase them away. But I thought, all right, I'm going to research I'm going to research the evidence for these specific pillars of society that they're being engineered to come down, and then I'll write a book on that evidence. So that's what the book's about.
It's your description of how you came about, what prompted you to write the book. It's interesting and alluring to me because this week, or over the weekend there, I was listening to your a book, an audiobook, and at the same time I was also reading John C. Lilly's Simulations of God, and his description of what prompted him to write his book is very similar.
Hmm.
That he felt that the knowledge wasn't coming from within himself, but it was almost like a download, a
Yeah.
revelation from out with himself. And this was what prompted him to write a greater piece of literature that has proved to be a successful book. And you're saying the same, for my audience who may not be aware, because there are a lot of people that come across this content online for the first time. And terms like globalist may be unfamiliar to a lot of people. What exactly is a globalist?
Yeah, so that's a term that has a lot of meanings. From the so there's good globalism, I would call it, and then there is globalism that is nefarious. Good globalism could be like in the sense of companies doing business exchange students from Europe to America. So that's good globalism in the sense of getting to know the globe, getting to know the world. Um, we're not talking about that. From the sense of the book, globalism means the globalist philosophy and planning to turn the world from one of independent nations to one of a centralized global economy, global system of laws, basically dissolving international borders and creating one big system with its one financial system, one world government, even even one world religion, to basically merge everything into this oneness where they have ultimate power, dictatorial power. And we see hints of this in the United Nations itself. We see hints of it with, like, the World Health Organization seeking unilateral power to declare a pandemic and unilateral authority to basically to dictate what the protocols must be during that pandemic, in terms of shutting down businesses, in terms of social distancing, in terms of the shots you have to take. All of it is centralized. So when you think of globalism, just think of the pyramid. All the power is at the top of the pyramid, and it is one global system. Countries in name only, all the authority, though, coming from the top.
You know, I was going to ask you to describe some of the pillars that you feel are being dismantled, but you did. You gave a general description of some there: um, healthcare, religion, spirituality, um, business. And I'm not American, so therefore I'm not a Democrat or a Republican.
Sure.
The way I see it, and you alluded to this there, that I don't think we have global government yet, but I do think we have global governance. And I don't think that's anything new, to be honest. I remember reading books written in the 19th century, and they described the agenda as internationalism, and they called these people internationalists. And the way they described them is similar to how we normally would describe a globalist. And this was before the Federal Reserve, the UN, the World Bank, the Trilateral Commission, etc. Um, and the development of a world economic system that evolved a global elite running it. Again, I don't think it's anything new. And in the 19th century, we had big pushers of globalism in the Anglosphere, and it was primarily, of course, the British Empire. You had the saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire, because the British had a
Sure.
presence essentially everywhere back then. And this is still left, the mark of that is still left today. Wherever the British Union Jack billowed in the wind, you had British banks and corporations that followed. And today, Britain still has more offshore territories where offshore banking is done, more than any other state. So the notion of internationalism versus globalism, that this is not a new phenomenon. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. It's existed for centuries, and it's a slow rolling tightening of the noose, as I see it. And now we have technology, particularly AI, multiplying the power to enforce what could eventually become a one world government. For example, um, the ability to surveil people. Okay, so in the old Soviet Union, people were surveilled quite aggressively, right? But in today's society, we're all surveilled to a point, and it's getting worse. Um, After the 2020 worldwide health crisis, I would be curious to know if this was the case where you are. But here in the States, as we emerge from that health crisis, that global pandemic, we emerged to 5G towers that were everywhere, that were not there for the most part prior to the lockdowns. We emerged to cameras on almost every intersection that were not there prior to the lockdowns. I live in a small town close to a city, right? even in this small town, the major intersections all of a sudden had cameras that were not there before. So the
Mhm.
surveillance that we have today, of our phones being tracked, or tracking our movements, of cameras tracking our movements, of our email systems tracking our communications, and of big government coming in and demanding the authority that these multinational corporations turn over their data to the government,
Mm.
creates an ability of top down control unlike anything that ever existed in the history of the world until recently. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
say
was
it's a
about
slow rolling noose. I mean, it moves very slowly and subtly, but very purposefully, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say that myself. That this move towards globalism, it may not be a new phenomenon other than what we're seeing today in regards to the technology that allows for better global interconnectivity, and this itself can be a startling, change to many people. You were describing how you've got 5G towers all over the place and cameras and data banks where information about anyone can be stored and collected, and as part of the times. But there is there's another way I see it. In fact, this is could you play clip one? This is how I sort of see what's happening in the Western world today, and tell me if you agree.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table to figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago.
You know, that's late George Carlin. I'm sure you're
Yeah.
familiar.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I've noticed again. I'm over here in the UK, but I've noticed the MAGA base. With people who I've heard a lot of the working and middle classes have moved towards that that concept of MAGA. That isn't a new one. I heard that Reagan, promoted that as part of his campaign too. Um, but they're opposed to seeing their country dependent on systems that are outside of the nation state. And over here in the UK, we describe that as isolationism. You hear a lot of people in our media say, "Well, with Trump, the US is becoming isolationist." But you could also call it independence if you want to rely on systems within your own nation state as opposed to international systems out with it. Why is that isolationist? That sounds a lot more like independence.
I agree, and I think he's really calling for a return to the way nations used to be, more so in the past than they are today. Um, yeah, I think the deindustrialization of the West, of all of Europe essentially, and America, was a plan. And since that deindustrialization and the shift to China, and the shift to in the U.S. case, the shift to the NAFTA nations, Mexico and south of Mexico, America basically gave up its manufacturing and with it its independence. And from my perspective, Europe did the same thing. And what I believe Trump is calling, not just the U.S. but other nations, if you listen to him closely, he says you should be doing what you feel is the best for your country. I'm the president of America. I'm going to do what I feel is best for my country. But he tries to make, um, like one-on-one trade agreements with countries so that they can negotiate in their best interest, rather than leaving it to some World Trade Organization to be the ultimate authority with everything. Because I don't think our countries are as healthy as they used to be. I remember a time, for example, when America used to make almost everything when I was a boy. Texas Instruments. We made all our own chips, for computers. We made our TVs, our washers, our dryers, our cars. Everything you bought pretty much came from America. And we imported some things, sure, but we weren't reliant. Now all our pharmaceuticals come from China, like 90% of them. And, not to mention rare earth minerals and other things too. We've become, I think, in an unhealthy way, we become too dependent on other nations. So now, and I don't just mean one nation. I see it as a globalist um, strategy to make nations so interdependent that they have greater control that way. That's like holding a gun to your head. And I believe Trump is trying to extract us from that, extract us from the World Health Organization, extract us from the power of the United Nations, because it's not in our best interest. And I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to have a dominant world authority, calling the shots.
And it was people like Brzezinski and and people in the Trilateral Commission that did bring China essentially into the World Trade Organization that re-engineered global trade as we know it.
Yeah.
So these were Americans that sort of sabotaged for their own future, and over here again, going back to the 2024 election, we definitely saw the vote for Trump expand. With many of the working class voting Republican for the first time, or voting for Trump for the first time. And I know I've got a lot of friends in America, and they felt, when I was asking them why they voted for Trump, they felt that corporate oligarchs were detached from American society, but they didn't invest back in American society.
Exactly.
And it looked like to many of my friends that their interests were being betrayed. And you had of the offshoring of jobs you were describing that, with the manufacturing. You had hiring of migrants by the millions instead of citizens. In fact, wasn't there a fallout between Steve Bannon and Elon Musk over this very issue, the hiring of migrants over Americans? I think they called it the H1B visa.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there was a big falling out. And yeah, people have all kinds of opinions on that. I could see the H-1B visas for when you genuinely need to pull in talent that you don't have. But there's been plenty of news articles of how that's been abused, where people are hiring their replacement at half the price. Walt Disney and many other big corporations, my understanding, had policies like that. And, people are I personally know someone who had to do that, not with Disney, but with another company, another big company. And it's demoralizing and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. It's companies making themselves rich at the expense of their own citizens and at the expense of the health of the country. We call it the Rust Belt. These are the former industrial uh, cities and states within the United States. They're called the Rust Belt because they're rusty and decaying. They used to be factories that are just left vacant, and with it, the jobs go and the drug addiction soars, and we're a shadow of what we used to be as a nation in many ways.
What is the actual reason they call it the Rust Belt?
Well, because these are factories that are standing idle and actually going rusty. So,
Is that
for example,
right? That's the real
yeah,
reason. Right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's
So,
it's pitiful. I've seen it myself. I grew up near some large cities in Pittsburgh, and I saw the decline. And later, when I was involved in the manufacturing industry myself, um, during the time that NAFTA was coming into play, there were seminars that uh, corporations sent their employees to learn how to outsource, because the fear was my competitor, if he learns how to do it faster than I learn how to do it, I'm going to be at a disadvantage and I'm going to go out of business because his
Right.
price of labor is going to be half of what my cost of labor is. And so there was this rush to learn how to outsource. I saw dozens of factories within a 30-mile radius of where I worked go out of business because it was all going south to NAFTA.
So from over here again, as a Brit, as a Scot, if we were to go down the road of populism, and there is an equivalent over here with the Reform Party and with Nigel Farage heading it, if we were to go down the same route as Trump and MAGA, what benefits do you think we have as Brits to embrace American style populism? If you could describe it as that American style populism.
I feel that the choice between nationalism and globalism is the real choice. The populism is just a reflection of that reality. Populism is like, start helping us to have jobs again, give us a sense of dignity, help us to quit being abused by these massive corporations that benefit themselves at the expense of their nations. I personally, and I think most people would echo this if they understood what's at stake clearly enough. I personally would rather pay more and see my fellow citizens employed than pay less and see really hundreds of thousands a year dying from fentanyl overdoses because they've lost hope. They have no work. They have no dignity. And, just with the abuse of immigration that was set up to flood these countries, yours and mine and all of Europe and Australia and New Zealand and others, with uncontrolled migration to dilute our working class, to dilute our actual societies and sense of who we are. We start losing our cultural identity. Now, America is a melting pot. We bring in more legal immigrants than any country in the world and have. That's who we are. But it was done in an organized way where people had to come in, they had to have someone supporting them. If we go far enough back in history, they had to have someone supporting them, a job, a family, something that was going to give them a chance to make it in this country and not just be a drain on the welfare system, which didn't even exist back then in the beginning. But there was an orderliness to it. And I think that nobody has a problem with that. What everybody, I think, gets enraged over, who looks at it closely enough, is this just let everyone in with no monitoring, just bring it all in and bring everyone in and let them be on the welfare system and give them privileges your own citizens don't have. I think that's what sparks the populism, and which is really a form of what we can call nationalism, which just means do what's best for your country, politicians, instead of every other thing you're doing. You know what I mean? That's really the heart of it, as I see it.
I think there's a diversion taking place over here in the UK. In the media, there's so much mess over illegal immigration coming over the English Channel, and I think so far this year it's around 50,000 people. Now, I'm not saying that's not a problem. That is a problem. However, legal immigration into the United Kingdom is 1 million. 1 million. So there is this, there are these arguments and conversations taking place between all the political parties in the mainstream media about 50,000 illegal immigrants coming across the channel, yet 1 million per year. And we we live in an island. I remember about 20 years ago, the average number of migrants coming into the United States was 1 million a year. I remember it was 1 million a year, but you live in a continent that's about 60 times the size of Britain. And yet we are now getting 1 million legal migrants into this country. Now, I'm
That's
not saying
amazing.
that's a good thing or a bad thing. You can make your own mind as to whether you think embracing this many migrants is going to be good for the social system. Um, but it's a hell of a number, isn't it?
Oh, I don't. What is the population? Back when I recall, the population of the UK was around 80 million. What is it today?
The population of the UK is less than 80 million. Apparently, I think
Is
it's
it?
supposed to be around 70 million.
Okay,
Um,
70 million. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, that's an enormous amount of legal migration for a population of 70 million. So we're at around 340 million right now in the US. So yeah, you are at a much higher per capita migration rate
it's
than
not, it's
we
not
are.
just that, but it's the birth rate. So I think the birth rate of the UK is something like 2.2 per family.
Wow.
So we're not replacing ourselves, and therefore the government is looking for replacement migration because just people aren't having children like they used to. When I look at my grandparents, they had 6 children each.
Sure,
So
sure.
that's 12 aunts and uncles I have. But when I look at almost everyone my own age, they have 1, 2 children, and I mean Scotland is different. Scotland is different when you compare it to England. Um, and it is a real melting pot in Scotland in terms of cultures. And England, there is more upset over the issue in England than there is in Scotland. But I've also lived in other countries throughout Europe, such as the Netherlands and France and Germany. And when I was living in the Netherlands, I lived in a city called Utrecht for most of my time there. And when I moved there, I first thought the native Dutch were racist because they didn't really like the other migrants. And primarily, it was the Moroccan community and the Turkish community. So there were three main communities in the Netherlands: Turks, Moroccans, and the Dutch, and they didn't interact at all. Now, I lived in a community that was run by Moroccans because that was where my girlfriend stayed at the time. And the Moroccans would only essentially put up Dutch females. They wouldn't allow Dutch males to live there. So, because I was living in a Moroccan community and I was white, I was attacked several times in that area because they thought I was, a native Dutch guy. And I realised from then on in the, the conflict between the communities that existed in Europe. And then I saw something similar in Germany. So I don't personally blame any group of people for being different because essentially I think we're all the same. We all want what's best for ourselves, for our families. We all want health and happiness. But when you bring in that vast amount, that number of people in such a small amount of time, it's going to create social incohesion.
Well, yes, and we're at a time in society where AI is changing everything. Where, it used to be when you went back in time in the U.S. when we had migration from all over Europe, there were jobs. America was an industrial power. There was a place for these people to have meaningful employment. If you compare that today with the irresponsible mass migration that's being permitted, people are coming in without a job, without an education, without a chance to really make it in the society. And meanwhile, the society uh, is not manufacturing, is not making their own things. Could you imagine how many more jobs would be available in your country or my country or any country in Europe practically if we pretty much made everything we needed? If we did that much manufacturing, from clothing to all the things you buy in the store, if there were factories made in your country and my country that handled all this, there would be a lot more jobs for people to come into for migration. But we don't have those jobs anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
See,
what are they going to do?
the area I'm from was an industrial, you know, manufacturing hub of the world during and before the Second World War. In fact, the Third Reich bombed the hell out of this part of the world because there were so many shipbuilding sites, and their BAE systems is just a mile down the road from where I am. So there is quite a lot of work still about. But this was a hub of manufacturing of the Western world. This, Scotland, especially on the Clyde, and anyone who is from this, part of the world will be aware of how Clyde shipbuilding had a role in the the events of the Second World War, and especially over in Britain. So yeah, and if you and it's amazing when you compare how dilapidated and run down these communities are here now compared to what we saw then. I mean, the quality of life in many regards over here is better because we had the beverage system where you had the NHS rolled out. So you've got free welfare, you've got free healthcare, you've got free prescriptions in Scotland, so you don't even pay for medications in Scotland. In fact, you get free cars in Scotland. If you want a free car, right? But the thing is, when you compare that to the quality of life in 60 years ago, it is better for the average person. But the state, the system as a whole, has it gotten worse or better?
And
Has our GDP risen or has it flattened? And I've been no answer to that.
yeah, well, it's gotten worse, and I think because of the borrowing and the debt all over the world, and the nature of the currencies, which are not backed by anything. Um, these we're all there's like a debt bomb that I feel is getting dangerously close to exploding.
Mm.
And if these currencies basically become almost worthless, and we come into a period of hyperinflation, which I believe is very possible, including right here in the U.S. Our national debt is out of control and growing exponentially, and has been for a couple decades, but it's getting worse. And if you look at
We've got
the just
37
the
trillion now.
pardon me.
37 trillion, is that the national debt of
Yeah,
the
I
United
think it's
States?
I think it's almost 38 now. But right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the last trillion took about 90 days to increase by a trillion in roughly 90 days. When I wrote the book, I said it was increasing by a trillion roughly every 100 days. So it was 100 days a year ago, and now the time is even shortening. So, but it's not just here; it's all over the world. It's Japan, it's China, it's even Russia. I mean, all these the debt to GDP ratios are in very poor shape.
But
And
how can a
yeah,
system sustain itself when you have a trillion in debt being accrued every 100 days? How
I
is
don't
that?
think I don't think it can. In the past, the dollar was the de facto world reserve currency, and because everybody wanted our currency to buy oil, you had to buy it in dollars under the petrodollar system, which is no longer in effect. Saudi Arabia sells oil in every currency now.
Mhm.
Um, the the power of the U.S. dollar was that everybody needed to buy treasury bills so that they'd have money to exchange, and it was considered a reliable currency, strong government, strong military, very reliable for the long term. That's
Mhm.
changing. You have the BRICS currency coming in. You have banks buying more gold now than treasuries. They say for the first time in history, gold's been made a tier one asset, and central banks hold more gold than they hold U.S. treasuries for the first time. So
Mm.
the writing's on the wall. The power of the dollar is falling, and I think if something doesn't change, I think it's only a matter of time before we begin to see a slow roll of hyperinflation. I mean, we're seeing it to some extent already. I mean, like beef is double what it was a couple years ago.
Mhm.
Fuel is better. There's a few things that are better. Egg prices have come down, but you talk about insurance premiums are growing by maybe 15 to 25% a year over year. Insurance for your business, insurance for your home. Many states have home heating costs that are going up by 20, 30, 40%. I mean, I've seen in parts of Europe, you've seen terrible increases in the price of energy, if
Yeah.
my sources are correct. So this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon, but yeah, I think things are unstable in many ways, and I do believe much of it is by design. I
It
think
is worse. It is worse in countries such as Germany. I have certain friends over in Germany, and they were telling me that certain supermarkets were shutting off their lights, were closing shop like 5 hours earlier than they normally would because they couldn't. Well, I'm not saying they couldn't afford to pay, but the price for maintaining the fridge freezers, for example, throughout the night. And these were 24-hour stores originally, and now they're closing at 7 because they can't maintain the energy throughout the night. It's costing too much. So as something that is a serious issue, energy in Germany, France, Britain, it's self-inflicted as well. It's
Yeah, it's everywhere. I mean, the globalist move, and there's you know, the book talks about 11 collapse points, 11 pillars of society, and one of them is energy itself. And so in the book, we talk about that the obvious move is a move away from reliable, cheap, storable energy toward
Mhm.
unreliable, non-storable energy, wind and solar, sources that do not maintain their reliability, and you can't really store power like you can with coal, natural gas, oil. And, you know, the laws have been written in such a way in these countries, or the actions they've taken has just been to move away from it, to shut down coal plants, even to take nuclear plants offline, which I'm not a
Mhm.
big fan of nuclear, but it is a very powerful form of energy and a stable form. But I feel kind of a dangerous form as well. But even that's being taken offline, and so naturally, it's supply and demand. The cost of energy is going to increase as we reduce the supply. It's inevitable, and but it's a consistent move. Even in Canada here, north, you know, they're our neighbors to the north. I was on a podcast, and and he was telling me that they're doing the same thing there, that they're taking storable energy offline, moving toward even when they have winters. Now we're on the Fahrenheit system here, but you know, minus 40 degrees below zero. That is frigid and dangerous. And they're saying that
Mhm.
they're forcing us to give up our gas heat for electric heat. He said the danger, and I said, I'll bet you they are not building the electrical grid at a rate that they would need to support that, are they? And he said, no. He said they claim they are, but they're really not. They're asking us to trust them that, you know, by the time we need it, it'll be rebuilt. But I see the same thing in America until, you know, until the recent administration came in. There was such a move to get us off coal, get us off gas, and you know, move everything toward wind and solar. It's irresponsible, but it's consistent. It's a consistent
Yeah.
plan, it seems.
Yeah, and if you can collapse energy and you can collapse food, you know, food's another one. Over in the Netherlands, the government there is, and as I said, I've got some connections in the Netherlands with my partner who was there. You know, they were expropriating hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, just seasoned farmland,
Yeah,
without
I write
any
about that. I write about that in the book. I mean, that really caught my attention. The farmers who were protesting and spraying manure on the government buildings in
Yeah,
protest for all the farmland that was being taken offline. And you know, we see the same thing here, but not to the same extent. But it is shocking. And then you have globalists making ridiculous statements. I believe it was John Kerry who said, you know, we have to take the farms offline and reduce the greenhouse gas, or people are going to starve. Take the
mhm.
farms offline, or people are going to starve. I mean, it's laughable on its face, but they say it with a straight face. And you know, these people, I mean, John Kerry is one of you know, he's an ultimate globalist. He in the book, it talks about he spoke to the graduating class of Northeastern University a few years ago, prior to the 2020 event that rocked the world. And he said, you are going to graduate into a borderless world. And I'm thinking, how would he know that? And the reason he knows it is he's on the inside. He's a globalist who knows the plans. That's the plan, to create a borderless world. So yeah, they will graduate eventually into a borderless world.
Well, this is where I would like to transition to what I consider the most serious pillar being attacked, and that is it's got to do with borders as well. That's our national security. due to globalist funding private armies. And I think the most serious one right now is obviously the proxy war that we're seeing in Eastern Europe with Western powers on one hand and Ukraine and the Russian Federation on the other. And I think this is a perilous situation, quite frankly, because the recent events over there, it's not getting any better. And I would like to play one clip and one more clip, and it's just 2 minutes long. And this, to me, highlights why this conflict must end promptly. That it has such potential for destruction that anyone that just wants to feed more ammunition, weaponry, and finance into this is either a psychopath or is playing Russian roulette with all of our lives. So this is a clip of something I'm sure you've probably seen yourself.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Those are Minuteman missiles.
Like a test, sort of. Like a warning?
They're on their way to Russia. They take about 30 minutes to reach their target.
So do theirs, right?
Missile warning, this is Beale. Confidence is high. I repeat, confidence is high. Roger, we've got 32 targets in track and 10 impacting points. I want to confirm, is this an exercise? Roger, copy. This is not an exercise.
Roger, understand. Major Reinhardt, we have a massive attack against the U.S. at this time.
Hey! Oh, come on, baby. Don't die on me now. Oh.
Right, that's a scene from the film The Day After about a war that occurs between NATO and Russia. It's a frightening scene and it's a frightening film. I'll be honest now. I think the Trump administration is all over the place in this one. The reason I'm saying that is to start off with, in the diplomatic front, Trump originally got behind the General Kellogg plan, which was the same plan Ukraine supports. And that's a ceasefire first, and then we'll just try and sort out everything afterwards. Then Trump had the Alaska summit with Putin, and he changed his position aligning closer to Russia's, which is comprehensive negotiations, dealing with the underlying causes, then a ceasefire. And then in the last 3 weeks, he's changed position. He's swung back to the General Kellogg Ukraine position of a ceasefire first. In this pendulum of diplomacy, if that isn't odd enough, we've seen Trump publicly commenting on giving Ukrainians American Tomahawk cruise missiles. And also, according to the Washington Journal, the Trump administration has given permission for UK Storm Shadows to be fired at targets inside Russia, with the guidance systems obviously dependent on US satellite navigation because we don't have the space-based infrastructure. And in the last week, UK Storm Shadow missiles have been fired into Russia. So my question is this escalation, and why is Trump swinging back and forth in regards to this? Why do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see into his mind, obviously, but if we like kind of take the historical view, um, I think he genuinely wants to bring peace. I think he's been extremely frustrated by um, both the Ukrainian positions and the Russian positions, where Ukraine has shown almost no willingness, in my opinion, at least from the news
Mhm,
I see here, and I'm including the alternative news media. I've seen almost zero willingness on Ukraine's part, and
mhm,
I'm not talking about the people; I'm talking about the leadership. Um, Zelensky to act in good faith and to um, be reasonable, right? And so it appears to me that Russia is not going to stop until they get a real peace deal. They feel like that's their leverage. And Trump, his style is always, that I've seen, to escalate, to
mm,
to try to get people into a position where they're forced to negotiate. And so he's cranking up the pressure on Russia in the hopes that they'll come to the table. But it's not working as far as I can tell. And I think we're in danger of serious escalation. And it scares the heck out of me. Some of the things you've mentioned have frightened me as well. The storm shadow, talking about, well, maybe Ukraine can push Russia out and maybe even go from there. Like, who is talking to this man? Is this Kellogg? Who is it? Somebody is giving him bad information. Um, I do think his nature again is to try to get peace. I think he's being frustrated, so he's reverting to his tactics of increasing the pressure to try to bring people to the table. Um, I think the meeting in Alaska was a genuine attempt to end the thing.
mm,
He's tried to end conflicts, 7 other conflicts around the world, and has been somewhat successful in most of those. So what's consistent? That peace effort, that attitude toward peace, I think, is a consistent thing. But the art of the deal, they call it. I don't think it'll work with Russia because I think for them this is as ex- existential. Couldn't pronounce the word. They see that as an existential threat.
yeah,
NATO has been moving in, artillery, moving in missile systems into Ukraine. Has been doing it for decades, even though there was an agreement with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. The agreement was that Ukraine would be like a buffer zone. They would never
mhm,
join NATO. We would not move equipment into there. They would be a buffer zone between Europe and Russia. And NATO and the West did not honor that. And Russia sees themselves surrounded. I mean, if the United States had to deal with China or Russia moving missile systems into Mexico closer and closer to the border in bigger and bigger numbers, do you think the United States would be okay with that? You know what they would do. They would go after it. And
yeah.
that's how I see Russia's
But,
position.
but this isn't a situation we need to go into hypotheticals with. We just need to go back to the 60s when the Russians were putting missile systems in Cuba, and the Americans, well, it was in response
Exactly.
to Americans putting Jupiter missiles in, Turkey. However, the Americans drew the line in the sand there. They were ready to go to war with Russia if they didn't remove those missiles. And
Sure.
what we are seeing now isn't just American missiles being put in Ukraine. We are seeing American missiles fired from Ukraine into Russia, guided by American satellites. If this was happening on the other, you know, to America,
Well,
we
the
have
thing
a
that
world war. And
baffles,
I also
yeah,
think that Trump did see that the supplying tomahawks was a serious escalation, and I think this is why he's gone down the road of sanctioning Rosneft and the other, I think it's Gazprom and Rosneft, the Russian energy companies. And to be honest, I think that's an escalation too, because if you remember how World War II started for the Americans sanctioned Japanese energy, but really crippled the Japanese empire, and they felt they had no choice but to attack the United States. So even going down the road of sanctions, historically has been shown that it can backfire.
Oh, it's such a high risk game. The what I was going to say also, the thing that baffles me probably the most is the attitude of the other NATO countries
Yeah.
to want to try to take on Russia. I hear France, the UK, Germany pretty much saber rattling. I mean, they're talking about drafts. They're talking about a 30-year war. They've talked about that in the past. Has been the plan to bankrupt Russia, carve it into 5 or 6 different regions,
Mm.
and it's just insanity to me. I mean, from my point of view, they should freeze. They should freeze whatever Russia has right now, freeze it and walk away because it's not going to get any better. The reality is nobody has the power to move Russia out of Ukraine without Russia retaliating with hypersonic missiles and everything else they have. This will not end well if people don't back down, in my opinion.
And your allusion to the leadership in Europe, they, I think, are suffering from severe hubris. I think individuals such as Keir Starmer and Macron and Merz are really operating within their own groupthink. And because they don't operate out with that groupthink, they don't understand the reality. Their reality is the group from which they operate inside of. And that doesn't reflect the world. And that's the that's the problem we have. And you're right, over here they are talking about conscription. There is a push in the mainstream media to encourage people um, to, there's that fermenting of the Russophobia, that Russia is responsible for everything that's going wrong. And I'm not here to, wave the flag for Russia. I'm here saying that going to war with Russia isn't in our national interest. It's not in the national interest of the United States. It's not in the national interest of the UK or France, of anyone. If we want to trade with one another and, folk invest in their own countries and advance their own interests, blowing each other up isn't going to get that done. And yeah, I just hope that wiser heads prevail over in Washington, because really, when it comes down to it, the UK isn't going to do a thing without the approval of, you know, the United States.
It seems like we're on a path to destruction if people don't gain a little bit of humility and come to the table. But you got to question whether they really want to come to the table. Do they really want to end this, or do they want to escalate it? I've heard plenty of analysts say that somebody's made the calculation that Russia will not resort to nuclear weapons and that this will stay a conventional war. I don't
Mm,
I don't share that optimism. I think the risks are too high because again, Russia sees this as an existential threat. And
yeah.
so at some point, they will do whatever they have to do, I believe, not to be overtaken.
Do you know, I was talking to Boris Johnson's sister, Rachel Johnson, regarding this issue, right? And I was saying, there's that potential of nuclear weapons being used. And she was saying, oh, Russia would never use nuclear weapons. They would never do that. And I said, really? What makes you think that? She's like, nuclear weapons have never been used. I was like, Rachel, we use them and we're apparently the good guys. Now, if we'll use nuclear weapons and vaporize hundreds of thousands of people in a flash, and we're the good guys, why wouldn't they do it? Think about that. And she was
Yeah.
speechless after I said that, because she hasn't got an answer, because again, she's operating within that group think that, Russia will back down. And, in a sense, I hope they do, because I think, again, our leadership is guilty of that hubris. And I don't really share much positivity. I share your opinion, but you know. But I've got one other question about what's happening in regards to the future of electoral politics in the United States. There's a lot of protests happening over where you're from, with the No Kings protests, and a lot of people who are arguing that Trump isn't going to step down in 2028, and Congress right now is closed because it's not, they can't come to an agreement for Congress to come back. What do you think is going to happen in the midterms next year? Do you think the Republicans are going to keep their majority, or do you think the Democrats are going to gain the House back and then impeach Trump? I know I asked you several questions there, but you had a
Well, I think the No Kings, starting with that, the No Kings protests are manufactured. They're paid for by leftist organizations like George Soros's Open Society Foundation and other foundations. These are not spontaneous grassroots protests. They're paid protests. And I saw one newscaster saying, who went to them, who said, "I've never in my life ever seen a protest that evaporates all at a certain time. Like 3 hours in, the thing was over. It was completely over. So, almost as if they were on the clock for 3 hours of protesting, and when it ended, it ended." Was just one example, but there's been many cases where people talk about how much they're being paid to do this. They get paid extra if they resist the police and get put in, sent to jail temporarily. This is a manufactured thing on the left to try to create something that's not organic. That's my opinion. As far as the upcoming election, I think it really all comes down to how free and fair will the elections be. I really respect France for the fact, and maybe this is the case all over Europe, that everything is a paper ballot. There's no mail-in ballots, right? That was the French system from going back a long time. I don't know if that's still the case, but my point is there's a recognition that mail-in ballots and machine counting are open to all kinds of fraud. I mean, President Jimmy Carter in the United States, he had a commission on this, and they concluded the same thing, that you can't have mail-in ballots. And yet we still have more mail-in ballots now since the 2020 worldwide health epidemic and the introduction of mail-in ballots all over the United States, that it is rife with corruption. There was the movie 2000 Mules by Dinesh D'Souza that documented, some of the horrendous level of fraud that was committed with these mail-in ballots. So to me, it comes down to the voting machines. If they can get the Smartmatic system offline in more places, if they can limit the mail-in ballots, then I think there's a chance. I know there was a big effort to keep it as clean as possible on the Trump side in this past election. They had lots of lawyers ready to go, watching many of these these ballot boxes. These outdoor ballot boxes were being.
that sounds like Jim Crow on steroids. What you saying?
It sounds like what on steroids?
Jim
Sorry.
Crow on steroids. Do you remember when Joe Biden was president and there were these electoral reforms with the ballots happening in Georgia?
Yeah.
And Joe Biden came out and said, "That's Jim Crow on steroids."
Yes. Yeah.
Which, is hilarious.
And this is crazy. I mean, I think they are insulting the black population in this country by making the claim that to show some type of ID is the equivalent of voter suppression. You have to show ID to buy cigarettes in this country. You have to show ID to buy alcohol in this country. The idea that you wouldn't show ID to have a free and fair election is so absurd. But it's worse than that, because it's all the mail-in ballots. It's everything else. It's the voting machines. Did you see the voting machines in Georgia where they were sending through the same ballots? There was a video camera overnight when supposedly there was a water main break, and they sent everyone home.
Yeah, I
And there
remember
wasn't.
that.
It wasn't any water main break. They pull out all these ballots from under the table, all of a sudden start sending them through the machines. There were so many cases in this past election. They were able to minimize that. But yeah, I think it really comes down to it. I think if it's a free and fair election, there is no doubt he will that will gain House and Senate seats on the conservative side.
And going back to the 2020 election, and that came about. You had COVID and stuff. That election, it just seemed so off. And
Yeah.
I know the arguments for it because there was a pandemic. We had to do things differently. However, even that concession that we had to do things differently in itself is an admission that it wasn't a normal election. And if there
Exactly.
were a normal election, he would lose. And how do we know he would lose? Because he lost.
Well, I mean, just look at the evidence right in front of our faces. Here in America, Biden couldn't get 200 people at a rally. They painted 6-foot circles on the ground and had a person in a chair in each one of those. And they didn't even have 200 people at a rally. Trump was filling stadiums with 50 to 60,000 people and another 10 to 20,000 outside who couldn't get in. They were camping overnight to get a good
Mm.
spot in line. And we're supposed to believe that Biden got more votes. I think it was 8 million more votes than Barack Obama. There's no way that was a legitimate election.
Yeah, that's that's hilarious when you consider that number. 80 was it 81 million they said Biden got in 2020?
I believe so. Yeah, it was far more than Barack Obama, who was
Yeah,
popular. You know.
and and when you look at last year and there was the attempted assassination on Trump in
Yeah.
Butler, Pennsylvania. Was it Butler, Pennsylvania?
Butler, yes. Hmm.
Yeah, and he was shot in the ear, and that was a powerful image with the blood trickling down his face and the flag, American flag, billowing in the wind in the background.
Yeah.
But it also showed that when his mettle was being tested, he rose to the occasion. He literally did rise and raise his fist in the air and
Yeah.
shout, "Fight, fight, fight." It was a powerful moment, a powerful image, probably the most powerful image of that election.
Yeah.
And when you compare that scene next to the debate with Biden and
Yeah.
Trump, and Biden unable to express a single argument coherently,
Yeah.
it was tragic. And it revealed that the last 4 years of your your presidency, your executive, has been a lie.
Oh, it was. And anybody who was watching the news on a regular basis had to know it was a lie. I mean, it was so embarrassing. I mean, it was every time he got up to the microphone, I felt like I had to hold my breath. Now,
Yeah.
I'm a conservative. I have no hesitancy in admitting that, but I don't want my president to look like a fool. And
Mm.
and honestly, so many times he looked foolish, and it was embarrassing on the world stage, embarrassing within the country. I mean, he obviously was not in control, and it was a big farce. I mean, it was basically, a lot of people say it was really ruled by committee. There were a committee of people running this country, and it wasn't the president. That's for sure.
Well, I hope, regardless of who is president, that things do get better in
Yeah.
your neck of, your side of the pond and over here, because it doesn't help anyone, when you have a leader that has got dementia and
Ah,
cognitive issues. It
yeah.
doesn't help anyone to have a global war. It doesn't help anyone to have a stagnating economy. So whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, a liberal, just hope for the best. It's
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Yeah,
So
we can do better than this. I think
Mhm.
everybody knows that we can do much better.
so I'm going to wrap this one up, but before you go, if there's anything you would like to promote or tell the audience about, um,
Okay, great. Yeah. So you can find my book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, on my website, which is globalcollapsebook.com. And from there, you can get the links to Amazon and other places. But it's available anywhere online books are sold. And there's also an audiobook version, which is narrated by me. So, and the audiobook version has a link where you can download or just link to the 175 QR codes that are within the book. So this book is a book that can not only help you get your arms around basically the entire globalist plan, but it's a book you can give to other people to open up their eyes. So this is what it looks like: the globalist plan to collapse everything. And I just want to show you a couple examples. So I wanted to make the book. Interesting and kind of where you could get graphics to kind of break it up, not make it too heavy, even though it's a heavy topic, but also QR codes. You can see the QR codes there, which a lot of these QR codes link to videos. Many of them are short videos. It's 100 videos and it's about 75 documents. And so you kind of get a break as you're reading it. You can jump off, go to a video. It proves the point. So every important point that I make in the book, I back it up with a source that you can go directly to. So it's immediate proof. And that's why it can be so compelling for people who don't really believe any of this, or who are inclined to reject it, because it brings you along gradually opens your eyes. And as you go, you become more and more willing to take on some of the more difficult propositions about what this is all about.
Yeah, it is a treasure house of information, and I recommend anyone to give it a read because it is really informative. And Paul, thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
Pleasure being here, Vincent. Thanks so much. Look forward to watching it later.
Right, okay, right. Goodbye.
Take care.
And if you liked and enjoyed that, don't forget to buy his book to check it out. And you can also subscribe and follow and donate at Buy Me a Coffee. That is Caledonian Elixir / Buy Me a Coffee. And next week we are going in a different direction. We have our guest Eve Lorgen coming on. She's a therapist who helps people who have been abducted and suffered from MyLabs trauma. We were supposed to have her on the other week. However, I had to reschedule because of, differences in, our time schedules. But she'll be on next week and hope to see you then. Until then, I will catch you later.
Press platinum, slip strips and bars. If you ever find some, you can lose it in quarks. Get a Ractogino, spin the double wheel. Order a black hole, just depends how you feel. Yeah, it just depends how you feel. Go press platinum. You know it's a gas. Mom vomits it up into a tiny little glass. Liquid platinum, more you amass. Better than bronze, cobalt, silver, nickel or brass. Silver, nickel or brass.